And these are called planetary boundaries. And a new term has been introduced called the Anthropocene. This is from the Greek root, anthropos, meaning human, and scene, meaning epoch of the Earth's history, a period of Earth's history. So Anthropocene means the human period. And what the scientists are telling us is that humanity is now the driver of Earth systems change. But if we're drivers, we're drunk drivers. We're driving, but we don't know how we're driving. And we're on a mountain pass. That's the problem. It's not a straight, flat road. It's a highly nonlinear road. So we have to get sober fast. So what happens in the age of the Anthropocene? Well, the curves, again, look like this. This is like Madison's picture of world output, but this time it's actually not world output, but world carbon dioxide concentrations. Carbon dioxide, of course, is a greenhouse gas, meaning that it is transparent to incoming ultraviolet radiation, but it is opaque or absorbing of outgoing infrared radiation from the Earth. And so it's like a blanket that covers the Earth and the atmosphere that absorbs the infrared radiation that the Earth would radiate to space, absorbs it, scatters the energy back to Earth, and warms the planet in order to restore thermal balance. In other words, carbon dioxide is warming the planet. And this is not a guess. This is utterly established science, of course. It's now understood almost by everybody except by the oil industry and except by Rupert Murdoch and his newspapers and television stations, which are pure propaganda outlets for powerful interests that don't want to know the truth. So we are on a path of raising the greenhouse gas concentrations, most importantly the carbon dioxide, also the methane and the nitrous oxide and the fluorine gases that warm the planet. So Mr. Watt had a great idea, and his idea made possible the modern economic age. But it had a side effect. And the side effect is that when you burn coal, oil, and gas, carbon dioxide is the inevitable result, and when it enters the atmosphere, it changes the Earth's climate system. And for that reason, we are breaching the planetary boundaries. Now, the ecologists have defined now for us planetary boundaries in which they have quantified 10 boundaries that we are now trespassing. Climate change is due north on this picture from a famous paper in 2009 about the planetary boundaries. What are some of the other boundaries that we are changing? Well, we are acidifying the oceans because the carbon dioxide in the air dissolves in the ocean water. That makes carbonic acid. That releases a hydrogen proton. That acidifies the ocean. And the oceans are now 30% more acidic than they were at the start of the Industrial Revolution. If you like shellfish, and Koreans do, and so do I, we're in trouble because we're deranging the marine ecology very, very dangerously. Every animal and plant life that produces a calcium exoskeleton or a calcareous shell of phytoplankton or the corals is being dissolved by the acid. And that's why ocean acidity is so dangerous. And if you go around the circle, it's also the nitrogen and the phosphorus of the fertilizers to feed 7.3 billion people. It's the water scarcity that comes from tens of millions of wells in the North China Plains, in the Indo-Gangetic Valley, in the American Midwest, draining the Ogallala Reservoir. We're taking the groundwater, some of which is fossil water, out of the ground so fast that we're depleting the groundwater. We're diverting the river water with 60,000 major dams around the world. The glacier melt and the glacier disappearance means that we don't have the spring runoff of glacier melt as we used to because the glaciers are retreating and eventually disappearing. So we're entering a period of water stress in many parts of the world. And with global warming, this is accelerating what's called the evapotranspiration, meaning that the water in the soil goes into the atmosphere far faster, and our food production is a tremendous threat. So we end up with mega storms like New York City had. And you think you're very smart. We think we know what to do. But in New York, we had plenty of backup generators in the hospitals, and they were in the basements of the hospitals. So they flooded. And we had evacuations of the emergency rooms in the middle of hurricanes. Unbelievable. But who would have expected in Fukushima that the backup generators would be on the ground also? And therefore, when the tsunami came, you had a nuclear disaster take place. We're not good at this. Maybe we're better the second time around, but the first time really gets you. And we have air that is unbreathable. When the air is like this in Beijing, the medical advice is don't breathe till next week. And this is becoming more and more common. Mega dust storms also that envelop cities to a shocking extent. Mega droughts. And by the way, I was in Sao Paulo a year ago, and I asked, how's it going? They said, not good. We have a big drought. I said, what are you going to do about it? They said, shh. I said, what do you mean, shh? They said, well, we have the World Cup coming up, so we can't say anything now. I said, are you kidding? They said, no, after. After the World Cup was the elections. Shh, nothing. And so they went a year before they announced an emergency. Then they put out water tanks to collect rainwater. Now the Aedes aegypti mosquitoes are breeding and spreading a dengue fever epidemic. We're not good at this, ladies and gentlemen. Better to have this under control than to think we can handle all of these crises. And this is California, the same thing, a mega drought. And my colleagues at the Earth Institute of Columbia say that we're going to have more of these mega droughts throughout the American Southwest and the Midwest. Mega droughts meaning decade-long droughts because of climate change. And we have droughts in many places of the world, and I put an insert in this picture to show the droughts in the Middle East, because it is clear that when you look closely, that utter disasters such as in Yemen or Somalia or in Syria are partly triggered by mega food crises that are secondary to drought conditions. Syria actually had the worst drought in its modern history between 2006 and 2010. And it was in 2011 that the place exploded by populations protesting against the government, and then the government cracked down brutally, and then an insurrection started, and then the powers all around plowed in their arms, and soon enough more than 200,000 Syrians were dead. That's what's called a nonlinear response. That's our danger. You went from extreme drought to extreme bloodshed in just a matter of 3 years. So what are the SDGs about? They're about addressing this problem. I keep grasping for ways to say this, so maybe I thought that Progress would summarize it. A program for growth, equity, and sustainable systems. Progress. I don't know if this acronym will last more than 5 minutes, but we need to find ways to explain the idea of the Sustainable Development Goals. Right now, they're a bit complicated. There are 17 of them. I was hoping for 10 or 12, but there's 17. We're going to need a catechism to explain them so that people understand what the different components are, how they work, what they mean. But basically, there are a series of SDGs for sustainable growth, including ending poverty and hunger and meeting basic needs for health, education, water and sanitation, energy, jobs, and infrastructure. There are SDGs for equity, meaning gender equality, reducing overall inequality within and between societies, and achieving peaceful and inclusive societies, SDG 16. And there are SDGs for sustainable systems, sustainable consumption and production, which is SDG 12, sustainable cities, SDG 11, combating climate change, SDG 13, conserving marine ecosystems, SDG 14, conserving terrestrial ecosystems, SDG 15, and strengthening the global rules and partnerships for sustainable development. It's an inclusive, comprehensive, holistic framework. Even if it's complicated, we need it. And it's close to being adopted. On September 25th, we'll have probably the largest gathering in world history of world leaders. Probably about 180 world leaders will come to the UN General Assembly that day. Pope Francis will open the assembly, speaking to the world leaders, reminding them first thing in the morning that day that it is our moral imperative, above all, to face these challenges. And by the end of the day, we should have adopted sustainable development goals. Then we will need to achieve them. And what are some of the key steps for achieving them? First, we're going to need new technological approaches in several areas. This is very important. There is no low-tech path to sustainability. Maybe if there were 1 billion people on the planet, there would be. But with nearly 8 billion people, we need sophisticated systems so that people can be healthy, can have access to their food, their water, their nutrition needs, their other basic needs. This is not simple. And our technologies are not up to it right now. So one of the things we're going to need is new partnerships for developing technologies, for example, low-carbon energy systems. Korea, the United States, and all other major countries are going to have to reduce carbon emissions dramatically. Korea's carbon emissions are now about 12 tons of CO2 per Korean per year. The United States is about 17 tons of CO2 per person per year. To reach sustainability, we're going to have to reduce that to something like 1.5 tons per person per year by 2050, down to nearly 0 by 2070. In other words, we need to decarbonize the world energy system. How can you do that? Well, we need renewable energy, wind and solar power. We need safer nuclear energy. We need to shift to electric vehicles rather than internal combustion engine vehicles. We need to test CCS, carbon capture and sequestration technologies. Korea needs to be in the lead among the technology leaders. Korea is one of the few technology powerhouses in the world. And to get this low carbon energy requires a lot of information technology, where Korea is in the front ranks. So this is one area of high priority. Second is new agricultural systems, because food production is going to be tremendously stressed. And we're going to need to have more efficient agriculture that is both resilient to climate change, but also causes less damage, less deforestation, less water damage, less flux of nitrogen and phosphorus, and so forth. Third, we're going to need smart cities that are a lot more energy and transport efficient, and that are healthy, happy places to live. And I believe that information technology has a huge role to play in this. And fourth, I put that we're going to need ICT-enabled health education, and governance. I believe that with global connectivity, with universal broadband, we can use this to absolutely revolutionize education systems, to improve access of young people to quality learning and knowledge all over the world. I know in healthcare the same is true. Just a smartphone in the hand of a community health worker can save lives enormously at very low cost. And I believe our governance systems can also change. We can use universal access for true democracy, because I think we could have some direct democracy in ways that was not possible in the past. And I believe in the United States, for example, that Congress doesn't represent us. Congress represents the billionaires that give the campaign financing, but not the needs or the wishes of the American people. So if we could kind of nudge Congress aside and vote directly and draft our legislation directly online, that might be helpful. So kind of an e-governance revolution, I think, could bring more participation and bring the needs of the people not intermediated in our country by the billionaires, but intermediated only by the information that is really needed for their interests. Now, what are some of the specific SDG challenges for Korea? I would quickly mention the low-carbon energy transition. I would mention Korea's continued leadership in sustainability. And by this I mean that Korea has achieved its wealth and prosperity by forging to the world's technology lead. But the kind of technology that will be in demand in the next 20 years will be sustainable technologies for infrastructure, for transport, for education, and so forth. So I count on Korea continuing to innovate dramatically, but to innovate for the green economy, because that's where the technologies are going to be most dynamically needed. Korea also has a rapidly aging economy. Every year I take more interest in the question of aging, obviously, and I believe in it, considering the alternatives. And I believe that we are also going to have to create new technologies and new institutions for our societies. Korea right now has somewhere between 10 and 15% of the population over the age of 65, but by the mid-century it will be around 35%. And this will be a different kind of society for all of us. This is happening in China and Korea and Japan and Europe and the United States. And this also will require creativity, technology. I do believe it means a quality of life that can be very high, but we have to think about it and prepare for it. It's part of the sustainability. And of course, Korea has the important issues of regional and geopolitics. Korea is a world-leading country, and it also will face, I believe and I hope, the prospect of peaceful reunification in this coming generation. And that will mean a challenge of bringing sustainable development goals to all of Korea. That will be a big undertaking of this country. We all look forward to when that happens peacefully, and we hope that it happens quickly, because I think that for the Korean people, this would be quite wonderful. But for this whole region, the most important thing is the relations traditionally between Japan, Korea, China have not been easy for obvious reasons. But now you have three economic powerhouses that, taken together, constitute one of the great poles of the whole world economy and of science and technology. So another crucial part of global sustainable development is good, harmonious relations of the three leading countries of this region. This is absolutely vital, in my view. All three economies fit well together. All three economies have a lot to trade and learn from each other, and all three economies have an enormous amount to contribute to the world. And so I believe that this is part of the challenge of sustainable development. And finally, I want to say a word about what we are doing under the direction and auspices of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon with the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Why a network? Why a chapter in Korea that is part of chapters all over the world? First, we need rapidly to upgrade global education in sustainable development so that from young children through advanced degrees, people understand what this challenge is and how they can contribute to it and why it is so urgent and vital in this generation that we get this right. Second, we need to research and design new sustainable development systems, whether it's low-carbon energy systems, urban transport systems, sustainable agriculture systems, low-cost ICT-enabled education systems. This is new design, and this is part of what the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, whose members are the leading think tanks and universities of this country and around the world, are aiming to engage in. Third is to organize social outreach, and I couldn't think of a more vivid and happy example than this evening. The idea that with the SDSN Korea co-hosting this event, we have a chance to discuss with everybody these challenges and to exchange ideas and to have the chance to talk about the new agenda. And finally, I want to say that one of our hopes and crucial needs is to preserve a moral outlook. In the end of the day, our challenge is not fundamentally an economic challenge, because the total amount of resources needed to end poverty or to convert the energy system to low-carbon energy, to put it all together, my estimate is below 3% of our annual output would be sufficient to get us on a course of sustainable development. All studies show that the incremental costs of moving to low-carbon energy, for example, at the top is 1% of annual output. Fighting poverty, ending extreme poverty, requires less than 1% of the income of the high-income countries. This is all economically within our grasp. Our problem is not the economics. Our problem is not the technology, because even where the technology isn't yet there, we can see the pathway to developing it, because we're in an age of unbelievably fruitful science. Our problem is fundamentally a problem of choice. Choice about what's important for the world. Is it really so important to feed the greed of people who have so much money that they haven't the slightest idea what they would do with more, except maybe appear a little bit higher on the Forbes list of billionaires? Or is it really the opportunity to use this wealth for the common good? I'm sure you'll agree with me that that is our mission. Thank you very much.